Whoa! I know I look like I just climbed out of the trash can, which, trust me, it's only somewhat accurate. But hello, welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals. I know you don't normally see my face, and right now it kind of looks atrocious, but I'm here to just introduce you to a very special kind of video. If you've been around on the channel for a while, or if you've gone back and watched some of my old videos, this is going to be kind of a repeat. This is just a supercut of all of the different Warhammer versus Destiny stuff that I've done here on the channel. The stuff that I started doing when I started making videos on a weekly basis way back in April. Because of that, some of the quality maybe, I wasn't as good as what I'm doing back then as I am now, mainly because I didn't have my whole audio situation, or I didn't know how to read a script properly, but otherwise, it's all here. A lot of the extra fluff and other things like that have been cut out, and it's just all of the videos back to back to back to back, because I realize, especially looking at comments in newer videos, is that people are asking for stuff that I've already done, and it's a lot to ask to go and look at the beginning of the playlist or anything like that. So here is all the Destiny stuff just all in one place. And I might do more supercut stuff like this for the other series of different versus Warhammer or versus whatever kind of things in the future. But for right now, this is all the Destiny-specific stuff. In here, one big long video that you can sit down, have it in the background while you're doing homework or something, or doing the dishes. I don't know what you do when you're watching my videos. Maybe you're collecting wheat in an open field in the middle of Greece. I have no idea. But either way, I hope you enjoy it, and if you haven't seen any of these videos before, I hope you enjoyed basically being able to sit down and binge them all at once. But without further ado, let's get into it. In the far future of humanity, where war is a never-ending tide of life, superpowered soldiers come together from planet to face unstoppable hordes of robots, aliens, and demons. Squads that can dispel the gods and creatures of Lovecraftian origin. But when it comes down to the greatest of humanity, the Vanguard from Destiny, or the Space Marines of the Imperium, who comes out on top? The issue we run into right away is that 40k is set up in such a way to win by mere factor of being so absurd that anyone on 2 feet with a mortal coil wouldn't stand a chance. Space Marines versus Gears of War, the COG couldn't even beat the Locust after destroying 90% of their own planet. Space Marines versus the Empire, Stormtroopers are more akin to Guardsmen and have a 50th of the numbers. Same kind of goes with the UNSC in most cases. But with Destiny, I think we find ourselves in a unique place. Because Guardians are tough. They turn gods into guns, and if that gun isn't good enough, they toss it in the trash for a handful of cash before killing the god a second time for a better roll on stats. They are effectively immortal, have space-bound superpowers, and often wipe through hundreds of thousands of enemies in squads of just 3 to 6. On top of beating the absolute shit out of one another just for fun and some extra loot.
Also, there will be a ton of loot! Yeah, right?
But Space Marines are equally tough in the right places. Losing a hand is considered a flesh wound. They have 2 hearts, 3 lungs, and acid-spitting glands. They can eat memories from the flesh of their enemies. Massive chain swords and guns that are so unconventional and overkill, but are the smallest weapons they bring about. Devout angels of death that bring nothing but defeat upon the backs of the vile Xenos that may oppose them. Let's be real. Guardians would fight the Imperium anyways. They each have different gods. Where the Guardians might try to go the diplomatic Tau route, the Imperium wouldn't work together with them unless there were some Tyranids around the corner. But let's set up a more even fight. Once you include the Traveler, Primarchs, the Warp, and more, it gets a bit wild very fast. And honestly, I don't know who comes out if you included the entirety of these universes, something we'll talk about more later. The total number of Guardians is not really well known, same kind of goes for Space Marines, but the Bungie devs used to hang on the idea that the number of player Guardians would reflect in the world, often being a total of just over 1.2 million players on any given month. For Space Marines, the only outdated number we get is 1,000 chapters of 1,000 Marines. So we're going to bring it down and call it a simple 1 million to 1 million. We're going to compare equipment, armor, powers, and how they fight. As it goes, we'll include more and more variables in this battle. Things like dreadnoughts, the darkness, other factions, and more as we go. So let's start from the basics. What's the standard kit of these armies? Space Marines are simple. What you see is basically what you get. 8 feet of armor, a bolt rifle, and that's pretty much as complicated as they can be. Ceramite-based power armor so integrated to a Space Marine that no suit can be shared between 2 Astartes and acts as an extension of the body. Think the Spartan armor from Halo, but on steroids. No, super steroids. Good at absorbing thermal radiation and attacks, the Space Marine armor is incredibly durable and shrugs off most low-powered laser attacks. Heavier ballistics and plasma weapons is where they start to fall apart and get blown away. Bolters are highly destructive ballistic weapons that essentially fire a 40mm rocket as if it were a Nerf gun. Referred to in 40k as being .75 caliber, this is not something you'd want to get hit by, even in Space Marine armor. Just a few shots of even the older model bolt rifles used by Chaos Marines can split a modern-day Primaris Astartes in half, if hit just the right way. On top of their actual feats of strength, obviously they're strong and the second heart and all that is important, Space Marines are able to fight in almost any arena in the galaxy, from a sea of acid to the vacuum of space. Fast, too. Described as a blur to the human eye, a Marine is described as pacing 6 meters per step. Now, Usain Bolt runs about 2 meters per step with a max speed of 27 miles an hour. So if we extrapolate this comparison, we can safely say a Marine runs at roughly 71 miles per hour. As fast as a cheetah. Now, as something that's also said to move too fast for their size, this makes relative sense to me. Okay, so Space Marines are tough, but what about their opponents? If we're looking at it under a microscope, where a squad of Marines ranges from 5 to 10 soldiers, a Guardian fire team will range between 3 to 6, hopefully with an equal distribution of Hunters, Warlocks, and Titans. Specifics of the Guardian kit and durability aren't as easy to come by though. Some armor is described as being so heavy that the weight would crack stones beneath them. Other Guardians have died by falling on their neck just the right way. So regardless of their armor and weapons, we'll keep on with the simple durable as regular humans, but enhanced by their shields and their magic to great lengths. And those shields can be impressive, able to withstand dozens of blasts from a slug rifle, micro-rocket propelled rifles of the Cabal. Sound familiar? Now, there's no specifics I could find for the slugs, but even if they're a quarter as powerful as a bolter, that means a Guardian could easily shrug off at least a couple shots from a bolter before their shields evaporate and they're torn to pieces. The greatest card up the sleeve of a Guardian is their ability to simply not die. And ghosts can take an inordinate amount of firepower, while not immortal will tank a hefty amount before cracking. Unless, of course, the weapon being used is infused with darkness or the light, which would kill the ghost much faster. And their magical abilities get complicated too. Ikora has used Nova Bombs to atomize legions of Cabal and destroy fallen tanks in a single blow. The Golden Gun fires bullets as hot as the surface of the sun, and Stormcasters call upon literal strikes of lightning to fringe their foes. Against a regular Astartes, it's starting to look like the Guardians can take the win, even in a 3-on-10 scenario. Space Marines are durable, but their weapons are likely not to shred through a ghost by the time the Guardians die and revive, taking the Space Marines out one by one. So let's step it up. Space Marine Terminators and Dreadnoughts. Terminators, which are essentially Marines in bigger armor with heavier weapons, emboldened by a literal fragment of the Emperor's own armor, said to shrug off the stamp of a Warlord Titan, withstand the forces of warp teleportation and anti-tank weaponry at point-blank range. Basically, a squad of 5 Terminators would compare to about 10 Marines. This takes the fight from looking like a fire team facing down some of the toughest Cabal they've ever seen into fighting Callus 5 times over. Could the Guardians still win? Totally. But it'll be much harder. more pressure, more firepower working against them. It mostly comes down to the placement of their super abilities and the number of Terminators they can eliminate between them at a time. You may have Golden Gun, but it'll be hard for a Guardian to snipe a tank that can instantly teleport around. But it might be close, and turning it up from here I don't think would work in the Marines' favor. I feel pulling out a Dreadnought or a Knight or even a Titan just gives Guardians a bigger target to strike with the force of the sun. If they wanted a guaranteed victory over the Vanguard, they need to outpace them. What about the Astartes flavor of magic? Psykers who draw on the warp to strike down the foes of the Emperor. These are called the Librarians, coming from the Liberius. Psykers adopted into the Space Marine program to harness their call of the warp in the worst of battles. The only source I could find online seemed to indicate that a dozen or so Librarians belonged to each chapter. Not too hard to believe with a billion Psykers in all of humanity and quadrillions of people beyond that. Only a few 100 million being good enough to become a Space Marine at that. Librarians are powerful and martial masters, emboldened by their psychic energy. But they're not even the best Psykers in 40k. Like building a shelf and instead of using finely made screws at just the right size, you just take a bunch of train spikes and hammer them in at the right angle so the bookshelf is willed together. The Guardians have a total control of the light, made even stronger by their ghost, a literal manifestation of the light within them. The biggest issue to me when it comes to Space Marines taking on Guardians is their ability to take the Guardians down for good. Most ghost entries are a little all over the place, as are most of the topics here on both 40k and the Destiny side of things. So I'm trying to be fair by giving each faction the best of what they can do, as far as the stories seem to suggest. Ghosts are described to being destroyed by the Cabal using orbital bombardment and heavy artillery, as well as with weapons infused with the light or even darkness. So if the Cabal can pull it off, I'm sure the Space Marines could as well. But that's if they can hit them. As they are literal manifestations of the light within their Guardian, a ghost vanishing on screen is not it activating some cloaking field or just dipping out. They enter almost a quantum state that does not exist in the mortal realm, just like the warp in 40k. But that means a ghost, while they need to materialize in order to revive a Guardian, can stay well out of sight, waiting for just the right moment. With the extreme accuracy of most Space Marines, they could probably be putting Guardians down. I think here numbers play the greatest advantage. An equal amount of Space Marines and Guardians is a fairly leveled fight. Then any shift in either direction drastically changes the odds. Even more so if the Vanguard need 8 minutes for a super to cool down. The thing about Guardians is that they just don't stop. Grey Knights would give them a fight, but most of their kit is based around fighting demons of the warp. Guardians are tough, but not demonic. Compared to regular Terminators, Grey Knights would definitely be the toughest fight yet, and victory the closest, but the only absolute victor between Guardians and 40k super soldiers would be the Custodes, whose physical power alone could outmatch the toughest of the Vanguard. It depends on the foe and the abilities of the Guardians, but for most infantry battles, I feel the undying qualities of a fire team would keep them kicking for a long time against any nearly enemy, with sole exception to the Custodes. A great example of this would be the Guardian from Destiny. The player characters. They aren't the fastest, they aren't the strongest. Titans like Wei Ming could punch a mountain and force it to move, but was still slain in a fight against the Hive Gods. But other Guardians, our Guardian, would get back up. They can keep coming back again and again and again and again. Strong enough to not die for good, yet deadly enough to kill you after sending wave after wave after wave of super soldiers your way. Now here we can also bring in elements of the environment. Whether it's the last city or even the holy halls of Terra, I think the battlefield makes an extreme difference here. Compared to a regular standard Space Marine, Guardians tend to have the upper hand on mobility. Their ability to take off into the sky and fly, and do even more with Strand. A Space Marine might be able to run at 75 miles an hour, but they don't get a lot of vertical play without extra gear like jump packs or vehicles. As far as tertiary details like civilians and harmful environments, Space Marines, with the exclusion of the Salamanders, will stomp through hordes of their own people to kill the enemy, whereas Guardians will probably be forced on the defensive if they had to defend the remnants of humanity. So baseline statistics, let's sum it up. Space Marines take a point for durability, speed, and accuracy, where I think the Guardians have a lot to go for longevity and mobility. I might even give them the weapons too. Space Marines have powerful weapons, don't get me wrong, but a bolter in the hand of a Vanguard is instantly stronger than the bolter in the hands of the Astartes, simply because the Guardians imbue their weapons with the light or darkness, on top of being able to summon ethereal weapons that burn with the searing rage of the sun or instantly bring enemies to absolute zero. When it's as dramatic as 1,000,000 guardsmen and 1,000,000 Space Marines, it seems to be that it's a genuinely fair fight and can swing dramatically in either way with little shifting changes. It's hard for me to come to a definite conclusion because it's easily a case-by-case basis that determines any of these fights. How many Space Marines? Are they Salamanders or Imperial Fists? Is there Dreadnoughts, Grey Knights, or Custodes around? But that's not what we're here to do. I think a solid way to compare these two powerful factions is the enemies they fight against. Guardians have never lost to a single fight coming their way. Even before the final shape, I'm sure they will find a way to turn the Witness's own abilities against him. And that's their biggest advantage over the Imperium's Angels of Death. The Astartes and the Imperium at large have this cultish discipline towards traditionalism. They refuse to expand or change, and the evolution of their gear happens incredibly slowly, if ever at all. When it comes to species with incredible technology like the Necrons or Tau, the Space Marines are folded in their archaic machines that sit well at over 10,000 years in age. In almost the exact opposite way, Guardians take every advantage coming their way, even to the extent of adopting the darkness to use against their enemies. If these two ever did come to cross into one another's universe, there's no doubt in my mind that a substantial number of Guardians would even allow themselves to accept possession from the Chaos Gods to give us nigh unkillable Demon Avengers who could grow to the lengths of the Demon Primarchs. The Guardians' whole thing is to adapt and change when they get beaten. Why wouldn't they change to take on Space Marines too? Versus Astartes, they just crusade harder. Now I don't think this means the Guardians outright win because they really want to win, but it's an important point in the greater discussion here. If we look at other enemies the Space Marines lose against, it's normally to a matter of numbers. Oryx and their Wahs are a great parallel to me about how a fight with the Guardians might go. The Orcs of 40k have beaten their way to Terra, the heart of the Imperium, twice. That's with Primarchs, Custodes, the Imperial Navy, and all of mankind fighting them back, purely for their ability to ruthlessly continue onwards in an unending way of death and green nonsense for years on end. And I think the Guardians would pretty much be the same on that warfront. If you take this further, the only reason Orcs tend to lose is just their lack of intelligence, something that the Guardians are not lacking on. What if we said fuck it to the rules and dragged along everything, smashing the universes together? Well, I think a lot of these factions would even out. Both being sci-fi series based on fantasy tropes, there's a lot of similarities between these factions. The Fallen and the Tau, the Hive and the Tyranids, the Guardians and Space Marines, the Taken and Chaos, and of course Vex and the Necrons. These are all important members of each perspective universe, but it's not the question at arms. There is no doubt in my mind that the Imperium of Mankind could eliminate the Traveler and the Vanguard if they really wanted to. At their full might, with spaceships that destroy solar systems and mechs so large they split tectonic plates. Soldiers so determined that they can stand still for a millennium and split a hair down the middle if called upon. Warhammer is just so over the top, it's the nature of the beast. But the Space Marines are not infallible. And that brings us back to the original question. Who would win? 1,000,000 Guardians, protectors of the light and warriors from beyond the grave? Or 1,000,000 Astartes, the Angels of Death and the Swords of the Emperor? What comes out on top? You tell me. Comment with your ideas, your reasoning, This is no question for one mere nerd like myself to answer. We need...
Cavalry's here!
Jesus, fuck, no. Brother, can I get some help here? Even with the varied options of the Space Marines, the occasional speeder bike or dreadnought that fights in the fray, I personally can see the Guardians working their way out. Now once you start talking Grey Knights, Custodes, Mechanicus, Militarum, etc., the fight leans incredibly onto the 40k side. But even at the very best, when you ask all the sort of can it beat 40k questions to other sci-fi series, Destiny is perhaps the most interesting to me for the sheer durability and the feats of the Guardians coming closest to Astartes out on the field. Halo's Spartans would get laid out. Clone troopers would be slain by the hundreds. The Alliance was losing against an overgrown shrimp. And the COG, well...
Something's wrong with this thing! It keeps jamming! See?
Yeah, but credit where credit is due. A Guardian fire team of just 3 members can give a squad of Space Marines a decent run for their money. Even if they die, they'll just get right back up. And at the very worst, I believe that if you threw the Vanguard into a corner of the Milky Way during the Indomitus era, that they'd join the ranks of the other small-scale 40k factions like the Votan, Tau, or Eldar, and be able to hold their own rather than be entirely obliterated. It'd still be interesting to see a Guardian nab a bolt rifle too, because with the light, they can theoretically empower said rifle and make it stronger than those used against them, which I think would be a very important thing to take into mind here. So who wins? Nobody, because you already played Destiny 2, and there's no going back. So this is technically a part 2 sequel for another video I made about the crossing of Space Marines of Warhammer and Guardians from Destiny. See that first one right here. And if you want the follow-up from that conversation, me and my buddy Ben talked about it on the podcast here. But anyways, in that first video we talked about pitting Guardians and Space Marines against one another, whether the light or pure bolter fire could come out on top. My conclusion, I don't know, it really depends on too many variables, but that's not what we're here to rehash. Today, my dear friends, we delve into the land of friendship. Not a realm of depressing front lines and purple or... Where'd all those orcs go? But instead we bring the hope of Destiny into the 41st millennium. What would happen if the Traveler and a strange-looking Terra appeared in the 40k universe and wasn't immediately exterminated? To be fair, I think these two sci-fi humanities could work together if the Imperium were able to accept the Traveler as an effective tool and want the Vanguard's help in battles against Xenos and Chaos, rather than murder or try to all of the Guardians for being loyal to this orb thing. I think this alliance would look not unlike the Mechanicus cult of Mars. If you didn't know, the Mechanicus doesn't believe, nor do they pray for the God Emperor of mankind. If this sounds like heresy, don't worry, it is. Because of their technology and strength, the Emperor, Big E himself, offered the Mechanicus their autonomy in exchange for them to work with the Imperium at large. You don't want to kill the only guys that know how to make your guns. A type of relationship I could see being formed with the Vanguard as well. Yes, we could fight them, but they turn an AR-15 into an anti-material rifle just by holding it. They have immaterial shields that can withstand tank shells and can summon bullets that fire with the heart of the sun. They can effectively make their own ammunition forever, and are really, really hard to kill. The Imperium could fight them, but why do that when they could have some incredibly strong strike force allies that draw on the Immaterium in the form of light, a source of energy that has no chance of being corruptible as the warp is? Meaning that when compared to Psychers or even Librarians, there's no risk of inviting demons to the dinner table when a Guardian pops Ward of Dawn. Now the next big hurdle is the Passes of Purity. The Imperium doesn't like non-humans. Unless you're Vulcan, or maybe Gilliman? But there's two big ones here, the Awoken and Exos. First, the blue space elves are actually technically human, created in a separate universe at a singularity where the light and darkness combined. While altered, and very well distinctly different, they're no more different from regular humans than the abhumans like Ogryn or the Votan are. The bigger contention would be exos. See, the Imperium have a strict no AI policy, based on experience in the relatively far past where an army of robo-servants waged war against humanity and nearly killed them in the process. That's why something like a servitor, a human brain merged with technology, is okay, but AI isn't. The logic doesn't really logic, but with the Imperium, paranoia takes the wheel 10 times out of 10. But exos aren't AI, they're a human brain turned into a machine. The Imperium would likely still not be okay with this, but if we compare them to the Admech, whose top tech priests do essentially this same heretical thing, but are protected by their political immunity, it's likely the non-corruptible, non-hackable Guardian exos would also be given the pass. Now, would any of the Astartes become a Guardian? And how would this even work? Would a ghost even pick one of the Astartes? They could. We see with the Awoken that just because someone dies after the collapse, they can still be revived and made into a Guardian. So any number of fallen Space Marines could theoretically be brought back with a new host of abilities. What would happen if one of them were brought back though? I think that depends on who you ask. Astartes are heavily indoctrinated into the Imperial cult to the point that when the Tau were attempting to turn one over to their greater good, a member of the Raven Guard, he chose to send both hearts into cardiac arrest and take the Tau with him, rather than let them continue to peer into his mind. But with the light, their mind would be wiped. Not little bits and pieces, but the entire thing. Their name, their families, their homeworld, the Codex Astartes, the Emperor, even knowledge of the Imperium would be gone. A new light is a blank slate for the Vanguard to bring up as their own. Now, it wouldn't be impossible for them to be found by other Space Marines and reminded of their history, their past, perhaps not of their own specific story, but of the chapter they came from. Where they go from here would depend on the Space Marine that's chosen. Some, like the Imperial Fists, might renounce the Vanguard and return to their duties. Sons of Vulcan might see the ability to do more good alongside the other Guardians and stick with it. Not all Astartes are known to be Codex compliant across the board, basically meaning that they may deviate or serve their own purposes in the galaxy. So a Space Marine choosing the Guardians doesn't feel impossible to me, as long as the interests of the Imperium and the Vanguard continue to align. As long as they're useful, you could say. Now for the biggest question. What is the strength of a Space Marine imbued with the light? We already have an 8-foot-tall death machine with robotic aim, a running speed of 70 miles an hour, 2 hearts, acid-spitting glands, someone who can lose a hand and keep going. They're tough as hell, and that's before becoming nigh unkillable. Taking down a Space Marine is no easy feat, and now, if you get to a point where you can take them down, they're gonna get right back up. On top of other abilities granted by the light, a shield generated by the Ghost that makes them capable of tanking incredible heavy arms fire, the boosts of a Guardian ranging from warp-free teleportation to the ability to glide nearly infinitely, to gaining the ability to jump 30 feet in the air.
So it's time to bring out the big guns. It's not a metaphor, guys. Go grab some big guns.
Weapons become stupid broken too. As I said before, a Guardian can take an AR-15 and turn it into an anti-material rifle, so a bolter would probably look like an artillery cannon in comparison. Plus, as we've also talked about, the Guardians can just create ammo ad nauseum from the scraps of their enemies. So take this stupid-ass bolter, and also, it never runs out of ammo. Not to mention the infinite grenades, the ability to summon cover in an open field, or to create a well that empowers themselves and others nearby. So you've got a Space Marine that can effectively summon powers stronger than most Psyker Librarians on a whim without exhausting themselves or under risk of corruption, as the light is drawn from the Traveler and not from the warp. So to summarize, we have this massive, tall, and muscle-bound super soldier who's already hard to kill, draped in heavy armor head to toe, can survive almost any environment, hits like a truck, and is so devoted that they'd rather kill themselves than be persuaded from their mission. Now make them unkillable with the ability to thundercrash into every being they find. This is all in the realm of fanfiction and more of just a theoretical exercise in the pursuit of better understanding the ideas, modus operandi, and action base of the Guardians and the Imperium, respectively. So now that we've established it's all nonsense and doesn't really matter, I want to ask you the most daring question of them all. Could a ghost find its ways into the holy halls of Terra, barring through the immense energy of the Golden Throne, and give the big guy just a little bit of juice? First, we have to establish if the guy is actually dead. See, the Emperor, this big ol' skeleton on a throne that's fed 1,000 souls every day, and has been for the last 10,000 years, whether or not all that is working, it's tough to say. There's 3 main scenarios we'll run through real quick. Number 1, the Emperor is brain dead. This first scenario postulates that the Emperor is effectively dead, a series of nonsensical psychic thoughts and energies flowing through the Golden Throne that can stand up in a trench coat that appears to be the big man up top, but is removed from himself in such a way that the Emperor in essence is dead. No thought, just mindless destruction and want for the unachievable deaths of the Chaos Gods. Scenario 2, the Emperor has transcended. Going further, it's also equally possible that the Emperor may have become a figure, or even something similar to it known as the Dark King, effectively the 5th Chaos God of the universe, as one is born around the height of any one civilization's power. Slaanesh coming with the Epoch of the Eldari, just for example. While not on the same level as the other Chaos Gods with the split of the mortal universe, it's possible that the Emperor's body might not even be a vessel anymore, as he's entirely moved on to become an entirely warp-based entity. The body on the throne is dead, but it's his spirit that is continuing to be powered eternally with the loving sacrifice of thousands of psychers. Scenario 3, the Emperor is dead. It also could be that he's just dead, totally gone. The throne alone does all the work, not the Emperor's spirit, nor soul, nor anything. It's a big ploy, on purpose or not, by the Imperium as to understand the natural state of the Emperor. When someone like Robot Giles enters the throne room, they aren't being spoken to by the cracked, broken mind of the Emperor, but rather simply being overwhelmed by the resonant energies of the throne itself. Now, if the Emperor is truly dead, that means in our fabulous fanfiction world, he could come back, which, as we talked about before with the Ghost Resurrection, he would lose all his memories. Now, who the Emperor is would not be too hard to figure out or be retaught. His most trusted guards and soldiers who fought with him against Horus still walk the halls of Terra in the modern day. It's not like the guy who backwater farmers could recognize would just be totally in the dark of his own existence. As to his greatest secrets or further thoughts, I will not attempt to presume the inner machinations of the God Emperor of mankind, but those will be lost to all that he did not confide in, and Malkador is not around anymore. What the Emperor would do with a second chance at life, if he were able to regain a majority of his memories, I think a lot of people would die very quickly. The Imperium is a shallow reflection of what it could have been, but what would this look like? Pain. The Emperor is already a 14-foot tall demigod with incalculable psychic potential, draped in massive armor and strong enough to defeat Chaos's champion Undivided. Now, like we went over before, he has access to incorruptible magic that hits hard, summons black holes, and allows you to throw hammers that feel like solar flares. One thing about Destiny's lore about Guardians is that there are no weak Guardians. Some may be faster, stronger, more accurate, etc., so a freshly ghosted Emperor would still be incredibly powerful and only go up from there. So if you've ever pissed off the guy with unimaginable powers, a fleet of star-crushing ships, and legions of unkillable super soldiers, now imagine him with Thunder Crash.
It's not a metaphor, guys. Go grab some big guns.
Hello, ladies and animals of the internet. Today I am delving back into the worlds of Warhammer and Destiny to pit these stupidly over-the-top sci-fi universes against one another. The first entry into this saga was to dissect the Guardians and Astartes to force them on one another to see who might come out on top. In the comments, the consensus seemed to overwhelmingly fall onto the Guardians' favor. most people agreeing that the very "know you" nature of the Guardians gave them an extreme upper hand, at least against space marines on the ground. As far as the naval fleets that can crush planets and crack the stars, it becomes a lot more of a wash, as the Imperium of Man is hundreds of infinitely times larger than the Vanguard, and often throws away planets wholesale just to get rid of the roaches. But for the most part, Guardians take 1 point according to my audience. Whether that's up to glazing, just the memes, or a misunderstanding of each team that was misconstrued in my past video, I'm not sure, but either way, that is the result we were left with. The second entry was our three-way mix-up of the Hive, Zerg, and Tyranids, where the win actually came down to Warhammer's Shadow in the Warp by popular vote. But I think we're just scratching the surface of these wild and crazy universes. StarCraft won't be returning for this one, but we will be returning to the others. Today, we break new ground. We will be pitting the Imperium of Man against the forces of darkness in Destiny, and in the inverse, looking at the Vanguard as they take on the epitome of chaos and Xenos armies in the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k. But there are a few ground rules we will have to take care of first.
It was like an ugly contest where everyone was a winner. This one dude was all, "Raw!" So I shot him, and then I shot this other one. Shot a couple extra guys just to be safe. I did a lot of shooting, if I'm being totally honest.
For these encounters, we have to establish a few things. 1. How durable are ghosts, and what does it actually take to kill them? 2. How does paracausality work, and does it interact with the warp? 3. What happens to the non-powered remnants of humanity and the Traveler in this scenario? All of the not Guardians. For that first one, we'll have to scour through lots of Destiny lore as different sources give us totally oxymoronic answers. While most instances of ghosts being destroyed are magical, such as the light with our own Guardian grabbing a ghost and crushing it, or darkness like how the Scorn killed Cade using a specific type of bullet, there are numerous instances of ghosts being destroyed by regular force. Granted, it takes an extreme force, but still non-magical. In some reports from Ikora, it's stated that the Cabal were able to destroy a ghost with orbital bombardments, and even in the instance of Saint 14, saving ghosts from a fallen captain wielding a Scorch Cannon. The fact that these ghosts had to be saved indicates to me that they are not so as indestructible some seem to think. Also, a small note on Guardians crushing ghosts during the Witch Queen. I think this scene also got misrepresented by Warhammer's side of the aisle in the last video. Our Guardian crushing a ghost in their hands doesn't mean Astartes could do the same just as easily. It means that our Guardian is infused with the light, which allows them to do extra damage to a ghost. So as for the total durability of these zombie machines, I think unironically you can compare ghosts to Thanos in the MCU. Not in power, of course, but how strong they seem to be. If you have a non-natural magical means like the light or darkness, as our Guardian does, or like using the Infinity Gauntlet against Thanos, it's infinitely easier than trying to do it with raw power.
All that for a drop of blood.
Second, what is paracausality, and how does that work with the warp and warp-based abilities? Simply, something that is paracausal is just unnatural, or rather something that ignores the standard cause and effect nature of the universe. Take an arc storm ability. In the real world, as we know it, lightning and massive surges of energy such as occur only when there is a massive difference between the negative charge of energy in a cloud and the positive energy of the ground, causing a massive force to release this buildup in the form of lightning, electricity. Arc powers in Destiny expel the energy as the effect, but skip the cause part of building up alternating charges. So paracausal entities, or the ability to be paracausal, is just sidestepping the natural order of the universe. In the way that stasis can instantly bring objects to absolute zero, how strand can affect the literal bonds between reality, how solar allows one to instantly start a solar fusion in the palm of your hand, rather than needing hundreds of billions of hydrogen atoms in order to kickstart the chemical reaction first. How our Guardian can jump off of nothing or enter a fourth dimensional plane and force their will upon it. In short, being paracausal allows you to write the rules. to a limit. The limit being the strength of a given Guardian or the being that wields the light and or dark. This does not mean that Guardians can say, "I want, therefore I am." Otherwise, we would never have Guardians dead at the hands of something like the Fallen, who up until the modern day in Destiny never wielded powers of darkness. This is also a difference between Guardians. A lot of people in the last video pointed out extreme examples, like Saint 14 or Ikora or even our own player Guardian, but that is not most Guardians. All Guardians have the capacity to do universe-breaking things, but not all of them have the ability to unleash that capacity. And in the inverse, what is the warp? Are Psykers tantamount to Guardians in the way that they wield the warp? In fact, I'd say yes, but not for the same reasons. Guardians wield the light, which makes them into paracausal entities. Psykers, Grey Knights, and other beings in 40k, like the Eldari or demons, wield the warp more like the Hive and the darkness. See, the Ascendant Plane of Destiny is practically the warp, a secondary, fourth-dimensional plane of existence that is manifested and controlled by emotions and intangible effects like willpower, death, love, courage, and more. It is emotion manifest. So in the way that the Hive wield darkness in order to carve their throne worlds out from the Ascendant Plane, I believe the warp might just be the opposite, where Psykers wield the warp to carve out powerful energies in tangible real space. So how would this work with Guardians? I think it would add up like the darkness. Creatures of the darkness, the Hive's witches, generals, and kings can suppress it, cut ghosts off from the Traveler's Light, and kill them in a weakened state. But it does not make them paracausal in the way that they can change the rules as they are written. The Witness may be able to, but we've seen clearly that the Witness is on a totally different power level from even the strongest of the Hive. So effectively, the Psykers and demons of 40k would be able to suppress the light, maybe use the warp in order to cut off a Guardian and their ghost in order to break them down and destroy them. But they would not be paracausal to the way that they just change the rules of reality. Because they don't. Instead, they just bring facets of the warp into real space, which is a different effect from the Guardians, who remain paracausal even in a Vex labyrinth or a Hive's throne world. And lastly, the greatest weakness of the Vanguard, their empathy. Where most of the Astartes and other human subfactions will walk through their own lines in order to meet the enemy harder, the Guardians go out of their way to save as many people as possible, even giving their lives for it. So for the foreseeable future in this alternate reality, where the Imperium of Mankind is shifted into the Destinyverse and the Vanguard are put into the far future where there is only war, we're temporarily getting rid of all these extra civilian casualties, because in 40k, they wouldn't last. We're just going to be throwing the Guardians into the 40k universe with nothing to worry about but themselves and the Traveler. Rules established? Players in place? Here we go. For starters, let's put the Imperium of Man scaled down to fit a single solar system against all of Destiny's villains. Because if you put every single world under the Imperium's control in the Sol system, you wouldn't have a Sol system. If we match the same number of Guardians from before, we can cut that 1 million number into a bunch of Astartes subfactions and the population of the last city into the many forces of the Imperium. For simplicity's sake, we'll say they have roughly 900,000 Astartes of all different class and legion, 10,000 Dreadnoughts, Custodes, Grey Knights, Night Knights, Soriatas, Psykers, Mechanicus, and other subfactions, etc., with the last city itself being overwritten with the Imperial Guard. Zavala? No. Now he's Robuti Gilliman. Ikora? Nah, the Lion. Cade? Probably Big E? I don't know, this is all for shits and giggles. The numbers don't really matter. The Astartes, who I admit were kind of lowballed in the last video, not just bolters and a handful of Psykers, but power swords that split the most rugged diamonds in half. Heavy weapons that fire a pool of gravity, pulling enemies in on themselves. Dreadnoughts imbued with a holy energy that is not quite quantifiable, but definitely allows them to dish out a greater deal of force than you'd ever expect. Others in the Imperium, from the Custodes who can stand still for centuries and on a moment's notice cut the wings off of a fly, move faster than the human eye could keep track of, and specialize in fighting magical demons. The Sisters, who are entirely boosted by their faith, pulling off feats that should be impossible by all conventional means. The Guard, who feature a tactic of literally throwing so many bodies at the problem that they can build up trenches from the cadavers left on the battlefield. A group of soldiers so dedicated to their dogma that the Cadian troops continued fighting even as the planet they stood on fell into itself beneath their feet. The planet broke before the Guard did is not just a badass statement, it's also a display of accuracy to such a motivated force. The Imperium has a lot of advantages and disadvantages, but by far, the greatest strengths they feature is a dedication to their creed, unmatched by even the robotic dynasties of 40k, the teamwork and utilitarian design of their force, dedicated to being as efficient as possible to no holy end. But if we have a much smaller force of the Imperium brought to the Destiny scale, how would they fare against the enemies of the Vanguard?
And the Vex, strange living machines, came to recreate our world in their own brutal image.
Right away, I'm just going to get these gone with. The Vex, as far as we know, cannot be destroyed. The Vex network spans every branch of time on the road to entropy. Even in visions, Eris Morn could only see a version of herself who locked away the Vex using a ritual born from the darkness. As advanced as the Imperium of Mankind are, this is the same principle that stopped them from being able to defeat an enemy like the Necrons for good. How do you fight a species that is beyond time and cannot be destroyed without destroying all of time and space itself? Adding to the fact that the Guardians' largest leg up on the Vex is their paracausal nature, which makes them unpredictable, think of Deadpool beating Taskmaster by the pure virtue of him being insane. No harm to the Astartes, but even the greatest of their ranks like the Grey Knights would be incredibly predictable to a being that can see all times all at once. As far as fighting them physically, the Space Marines would likely body hundreds of millions of billions of Vex for eons, but defeating them, rendering the sentient machines extinct, now that is a task I just do not see the Imperium being able to pull off. If Vulcan can be trapped in a labyrinth made by Perturabo for months and even then mostly only made it out because of Conrad Kurz's hubris, I don't imagine regular Astartes or even Custodes would fare well in a labyrinth designed by beings that can see and simulate reality on a whim. While holding them off and probably holding their own, the likely way I see it is the Vex would bide their time and simply wait for humanity to go extinct, rather than the two fighting in perpetuity. The reason the Vex have never killed humanity is that a Guardian's paracausality is too much for them to calculate no matter what. The greatest difference on whether or not the Imperium could withstand it is figuring whether they could surpass this. Between the Sisters, Psychers, and the Emperor Almighty, the Imperium might just have enough space voodoo nonsense to help keep them in the fight. But defeating the Vex for good, I just can't see that happening.
We fight, we die, and we live again.
Probably the easiest of Destiny's villains for the Imperium to conquer, the Fallen's greatest strength is numbers, darkness, and firepower. Large tanks, mechs, and space vessels they use to batter humanity. Which, spoiler alert, but the Imperium's greatest strengths lie in numbers, overwhelming firepower, and naval superiority. And while scorch cannons or arc throwers are powerful weapons, and a spider tank may be an issue for a couple space marines at first, the extreme difference in technology is going to put the Imperium at a wild advantage. Bolters and even lasguns are leagues ahead of what the Fallen's kit consists of. Even though some, like Aramis, may be able to wield stasis in the darkness, the number of Fallen capable of effectively using the darkness in a fight is not going to be enough to ward off fleets of Grey Knights or Custodes. I think the Fallen are an easy dub for the Imperium, that if they wanted to, the Guardsmen could carry a fair share of burdensome load and defeat most of the Fallen, leaving elites like Aramis to our Astartes champions. The only real dangerous card the Fallen possess would be when they were controlling the SIVA virus, effectively a nanomachine outbreak that has the simple directives to consume, enhance, and then replicate. If unable to destroy the control center, this would be a problem for the Imperium. But if they are able to handle the rest of the Fallen, I don't think destroying the center with a few well-placed nukes would be too hard for them either.
Lead your sisters now. Your coming will spare their short lives. And you will be reborn, the Witch Queen.
Now here is another enemy that is hard to defeat without the Guardians' paracausal affinities. The Hive, as we talked about in the Hive, Zerg, and Tyranids video, are incredibly hard to defeat without being able to kill a Hive Lord in their own throne world, which, as we talked about previously, works a lot like the Warp. Not to spoil things, but the Imperium and the Warp don't exactly work out often. Like in the Vex, the Imperium could hold their own and fend off the wormy army, but may succumb only in time. An eternal stalemate that drives the greatest difference between not the Imperium and the Vanguard, but Destiny and Warhammer. A big issue we're going to run into time and time again is the enemies and factions of these universes are deliberately set up for different things. In Destiny, there's a lot of change. There is an end goal at the bottom of the timeline with a finite storyline for humanity planned out. Thus, enemies can shift, they can go away, they can become allies, or even just as unkillable as the Vex are. But with Warhammer, the universe is designed for stagnation. I mean, the Imperium has remained the same for at least 10,000 years with little to no change, and it's much harder to sell a board game built around buying $500 to $800 armies if it changes all the time. The point of Warhammer is to be an eternal stalemate where sometimes a faction may be stronger or weaker, but at the end of the day, nobody is ever taken off the board or entirely eliminated. And we see this reflected in the power sets of each universe. The Imperium is strong. They clear planets on a Tuesday afternoon. They have super soldiers that move like walking tanks. They have mechs that crack tectonic plates, and an emperor that permeates the intangible reality by pure force of will and the power of a degraded mind. But their enemies are perfectly suited to withstand them, versus the Guardians, who are powerful and often the underdogs, but have a power set that essentially boils down to, this enemy is undefeatable, beat them anyway. So like the Vex before them, the Hive can exist in perpetuity against the Imperium, because even as the Astartes can hold out for eons, they can never kill the Hive gods, let alone enter their throne worlds without being invited in first. The lack of the Guardians' causality trump card is going to turn the battle against the Hive into a stalemate, as 40k often is. But relative to the machines of the Vex or the armories of the Fallen, I believe the Hive is the first Destiny faction that will start to put a hampering on the reserves of the Marines' population. Between the Lucent Hive and massive powerful beasts like ogres, the Hive have something the Fallen didn't, which normally lies in darkness-attuned magical attacks, which is not great for the Imperium.
You are weak, undisciplined, cowering behind walls. You're not brave. You've merely forgotten the fear of death. Allow me to reacquaint you.
But here, things get interesting. The comparison of Space Marines and Cabal makes sense. Massive bulky armor with rocket-propelled weapons, an honor system built around courage, and a culture of warfare backed by a fleet of starships that destroy stars, wiping them from the galaxy one system at a time. But too often, I think this comparison is oversimplified. The strongest the Cabal get is their weaponry, which, while fantastic, is nowhere near the overbearing superiority fielded by the Astartes, let alone the rest of the Imperium. A Skyburner and a Bolter, for example, are similar, but outside of a slightly larger variant of that, this is the strongest a unit of Cabal infantry is going to get. In close quarters, Marines have power weapons and plasma pistols that outrank most Cabal weaponry. Dreadnoughts and Titans outclass the largest of the Cabal tanks, and even when taking to the skies, the largest battleships of the Red Legion pale in comparison to the flying cathedrals of 40k. A simple Astartes, singular on their own with nothing more than a bolt rifle is comparable to the Cabal en masse. The Imperium in their greater force would molly-rock Destiny's toughest frogs for days on end. Callus's fleet infused with darkness might put up a greater fight, but unlike Guardians, who are scourged with paracausality and can revive indefinitely, darkness does not have this capability. Against the Cabal, as long as the campaign may take, the Imperium, even this lesser, smaller, Destiny-fied version of it, would stop. Another battle of attrition is the way that we finish off the Scorn, as they are revived zombies of the Fallen that can only be brought back so many times and only if they are not entirely vaporized. The Scorn is yet another Destiny faction that the Imperium could wipe out if they threw enough ammunition at the problem. The first step would be to walk the Fallen down the steps of extinction and slowly and powerfully take out the Scorn before they have a chance to reproduce. They come close to being like the Oryx of 40k, but with much less capabilities for rejuvenation. Basically, enough Meltas and you will eventually have no more Scorn left to deal with, hopefully.
You hold the universe in your grasp, and all you can think of to do with it is...
Secure the veil. We will create the link.
Infinite apologies. The veil is yours. It will be done.
A being of pure devotion. Where there is absence, they see it. Where there is nothing but cold, they feel it. Where the light cannot be found, they exist. The witness. Not a he, she, or even sometimes they, but an it. A manifestation of the desire for the darkness that binds together all that is unseen into a physical form. A being of unknown proportion with no clear way to defeat it, even splintering members that do have the light with a snap of its fingers. The witness alone is not an army with infantry, artillery, and leadership. It is the presence of an idea, the pursuit of nothing at the end of the universe that seeks for nothing but the final shape in which all comes to an end at the combination of light and dark. Where the witness fits into a universe without the traveler, without the great machine that figures as an anchor for the light within our galaxy, I do not know. But I do know this. You cannot shoot an idea. You cannot conquer that which is not real. In the same way, it is practically impossible to truly eliminate the Chaos Gods, amalgamation of emotion and lived experience as they are. It would be impossible for the Astartes to defeat the Witness without the Traveler or a light of their own to counter it. They may come close with the suppressive tech of the Cabal if used on their own accord, but like the others, the Vex or the Hive, it would only allow the Imperium to draw this battle on into an eternal stalemate, but they will never be able to finish it. And with the last battle of the Imperium in the Destinyverse done, let's turn over to our vanguard in the far future.
It is time to avenge this injustice, for that is the duty of all Guardians.
Worst case scenario, you die. But who knows? Maybe you won't.
So I ask you, who will stand with me?
Yeah! Really, guys?
That was inspiring.
Also, there will be a ton of loot! Yeah, right? That's what I thought.
Bringing the Guardians into the 40k setting is going to put them on a much smaller scale relative to their enemies. Where with the Imperium we had to scale them down to fit into Destiny, the Vanguard are going to have to be marked up just a bit, emboldening their numbers tenfold from before, along with keeping the Traveler around in soul. No Cabal reinforcements, no Houses of Fallen, just 10 million Guardians set to take out the universe. We know Guardians are powerful, turning a regular rifle into an anti-material cannon and using guns that shoot black holes. But I think a lot of the Destiny side overpower these ideas in the Vanguard's favor. Some Guardians, like Ikora and Saint 14, are overpowered, but that is not the majority of them. It is true that new lights have the potential to be incredibly powerful off-rip, but they can't all harness that ability just yet. A good comparison to this I'd make is Darth Vader. We all know Anakin was strong in Star Wars, and he was only going to get stronger. But even Vader at his strongest couldn't hope to take on Prime Anakin. Guardians work in the inverse. Even a strong Guardian who could be tantamount to Darth Vader are nothing when compared to the absolute prime examples like Ikora or Wei Ming. Basically, I understand how a lot of people who are quick to jump on the fact that the 8-minute cooldown is mostly for game balance and is not accurate when we talk about Apex Guardians like Cade or Ikora, but not all Guardians are Apex status. Hundreds of Guardians have died already. A new light, someone fresh to the godly powers handed to them, likely would have limits tantamount to a cooldown on their abilities, as they're not masters in the field. Now, those new lights are about to fight some of the most horrifying things the Vanguard have ever seen. Now, one other thing that is interesting is how the light would find itself on the many creatures of 40k. If ghosts were able to find Eldari, Tau, or Oryx and turn them into some wildly strange guardians. But I'll leave the imagination machine up to the wonderful people in the comments, as I mostly focused on the Guardians from Earth facing the many different factions of Xenos and Chaos in the grimdark future. And from here, we're going to pair them up against every single Xenos and Chaotic faction from Warhammer 40k and see just how well the Guardians would fare. One thing the Imperium does is fight all these factions at once, but we will not put that on the Vanguard. Instead, we're going to crusade back to back as we go through a series of lightning rounds against every enemy faction in Warhammer 40k. Another reminder now that paracausality allows them to sidestep the regular rules of the world, but I don't think this will apply to the already non-relative laws of the warp, as we will see later. The squatted abhuman miners that would make those who shout rock and stone jealous of their fleets that devour worlds just to scrape the little bits of rare metals from their core. The Votan is probably the one and only faction of 40k the Vanguard would be unlikely to mess with. Not for fear of battle or loss, but because there's no reason to. At the end of the day, the Vanguard only fight to protect the light and humanity. So unless the Votan launched a war against them first, the two would likely be allies. The Vanguard are a strong group to align with and much less xenophobic than the human empire that they've now replaced. Outside of the Votan seeking to mine the Earth itself, or maybe the Traveler, but we've seen in dire circumstances what the Traveler can do to defend itself from starships. The Votan would need to develop the same tech that Gaul had done in order to counter it, which he had only formed after learning more about the light and dark from Oryx, the Taken King. Without forces of darkness to reference, I do not think they'll have the capability. So yeah, the Votan is not a fatality, but a friendship. Now the Tau are a political challenge more than anything. Seeking their greater good, the Tau simply want to make the galaxy a better place, or at least better for their ruling class. Like the Votan, I believe the Vanguard and Tau would be allies, or at least at first. Eventually, if say somehow the other threats in the galaxy like Oryx, Tyranids, and Eldari were eliminated, then the Tau and Vanguard would become enemies, with the Tau wanting to integrate Guardians into their structured empire, with Guardians likely wanting to maintain their independence under the Traveler. But how well would the Tau do? Anything closer than 100 meters? I don't think well at all. Like the Astartes, the Guardians excel in fighting close quarters compared to the casts of Alien here. Their empowered weapons and super abilities would be able to cut down Tau warships and mech suits in surprisingly good time. The greatest threat the Tau would impose on the Guardians is their aptitude for snipers. See, the Tau are not hard to fight because they can't take you head on. They use a number of mech suits and drones specifically because they often fail at fighting close in your proximity, especially against a firearms heavy or intelligently tactical enemy like the Imperium, and even greater now, the Guardians. But their strength comes from railguns and massive long-ranged weapons. Guardians are strong. Golden Gun is incredible, but they can't shoot what they can't see, and they can't see a mech with a powerful rail cannon from 30 miles away so far that they could be hidden behind the horizon and still make their mark. Would the Tau's range allow them to defeat enough Guardians? I don't think so. Even at range, with the ability to get back up and summon sparrows that would eventually close the distance, the Tau may be able to take a few lives, but all of the Guardians at once, they would not be able to hold out forever. Like the Vex, the Necrons are living machines that fuck with time and space and use atomizing weapons to vaporize their enemies. While once upon a time, the Necrons controlled an empire into the billions with an untold number of worlds under their control, they've been whipped since then. Split into dozens of politically misaligned dynasties that care more to bicker with one another than unite under the Necronic banner once more, this is another faction that can slowly be whittled down if the right amount of resources were applied to it. Compared to the Tau, I believe the Necrons would put up a greater fight with their stronger melee prowess and weapons much more advanced, likely allowing them to figure out and even destroy ghosts. The greatest difference here would be if the Guardians can apply their fantastical abilities. Necrotic labyrinths would not be able to hold them forever, as Guardians like Saint 14 outlived the infinite forests of the Vex. The greatest strength of the Necrons is their tech and self-healing bodies of metal, but they are not immortal. With the right pushback and the knowledge that nothing less than vaporization will eliminate the Necrons, firing black holes and using abilities like a Nova Bomb can keep Guardians in the fight. But out of all of the factions so far, Necrons would not go easily. The greatest advantage against them in the modern landscape of 40k is that they are splintered and fractured, making it easier for the Vanguard to target a single dynasty at a time, slowly pestering down these magnificent, once great dynasties. If the Necron were at their peak, unified and working together, the untold billions of them that are out there, I think they could stop the Guardians. The reason the Vex have never removed Guardians from the time stream is that they are too binary, operating effectively as a single computer where each Goblin, Minotaur, and Hydra are just interfaces to interact with the real world. How a computer has the GPU, the RAM, the central motherboard, the Vex have their units, but at the end, work as a singular collective. The Necrons, however, are individuals. They were once separate from the mechanical forms they now host, and have kept their minds, for the most part, into the far future. As such, I think the Necrons, if they were unified, would pose a much greater threat against the Guardians due to the power of their stronger thought. They don't need to rationalize things that make no sense by the binary rules of reality, for the Necrons are perfectly knowledgeable of the intangible, of chaos, of emotions, of the sporadic makings in the universe that build upon the change which the Guardians use. But only if they are unified. As separate enclaves, they would be much easier to handle. Powerful sorcerers of the warp. The elves of Warhammer are a species that has long ruled in the galaxy, putting together empires before humanity could leave the caves on Earth, so powerful and widespread in the fact that their own hubris once birthed one of the 4 chaos gods, Slaanesh, they who feeds on the overconsumption and excess that the Eldari could create. They have no need for medicine, for they have perfected it. They have no need for experience, as some have lived for millennia and continue on through new, improved bodies. They fear not for the future, as many can peer into it. The Eldari aren't a powerful foe that continues on in the setting of 40k, not by numbers, which they no longer possess, but by the skill of their craft. And while very dangerous, the Eldari are also the greatest threat to the Guardians yet. Advanced psychic abilities and titans that see the flow of their enemies while in battle. The Eldari are likely to claim the most Guardians in battle to this point. But the victory does not seem so obvious to me on this one. Seeing the future, even predicting it, is something the Vex could do, but the paracausality of the Guardians, allowing them to work against the very nature of time, might come in their favor. Most Eldari weapons are lethal, but with Guardians, you do not just kill, you have to eliminate. Ghosts can be destroyed, but it would take immense work, something that will be a monumentous effort even for the Eldar if one downed Guardian is being protected by hundreds more on their flank. I would like to know from any of you down in the comments if the Eldar pose a greater threat than I'm making them out to be. They are the one 40k faction I am not so well versed with, and I'm curious if there's any deep-cutting lore I may be missing out on that will turn the tide of this war. But other than that, I think it's a fair 50-50. The Great Devourer. An endless tide of monsters, the victory against Tyranids will become a repeat of the battle we had talked about between them and the Hive from a previous video. Tyranids will have nothing to consume from the bodies of Guardians. And while I am not sure that their many forms will be powerful enough to destroy a ghost, the Tyranids win on a war of attrition, not by superior firepower. Both things the Guardians can stack up against. Tyranids have a lot of different forms, gaunts that fire living ammunition, screamers that rip apart their enemies, and massive phages that command smaller Tyranids to overwhelm their enemy. But when every Guardian can summon a small star at their feet, it makes the overcrowd and overwhelm angle of the Tyranids a lot harder to pull off. How do you get close to an enemy that when you bite it, feels like the sun? This presumes that the Guardians will somehow, eventually be able to extinguish every last atom of Tyranid in existence, the only way we know of to defeat these enemies that are purposely designed to not be beaten. Unless, of course, there's something stronger in the Tyranid fleet we've yet to see that could destroy a ghost more effectively, but all of that is mere speculation. And the Oryx, the last beautiful Xenos in the galaxy. As much as I would enjoy a world where the Oryx and Guardians realize they both love the Crucible, I know this would probably be a fleeting dream more than anything. But a war with the Orcs, just like the Necrons or Tyranids, is hypothetically winnable. Orcs are not complex as far as technology goes, but like Tyranids, win on account of their speedy reproduction and overwhelming number of forces. Two things the Guardians can face with abilities that atomize and weapons that would blow apart Gargants into pieces. Already mythical beings by the nature of themselves, the Guardians' paracausality acting almost like the Orcs' mental aura. I could foresee a world where Guardians are held in godlike standards by the Orcs, humans who can wield the stars and grab the strands of reality where the universe is held together. Likely more than anything, the Guardians would be more powerful than they normally are, facing against an enemy with such creative minds.
Gosh, I think that human just turned into a bird.
Well, that's new.
But like the others, the only victory Guardians can hope for is a long and drawn-out campaign in which they vaporize every last atom until none left of Orcish kind remains, and the longer they take, the more dangerous the Orcs become. But now we enter the final arena, inside the warp where reality is twisted. The only reason Guardians would have a chance where others have failed is now up to paracausality. But even with their lives, I do not think the Guardians can take the Chaos Gods in their own homes. Firstly, the title of God here is in order. Many beings in Destiny are referred to as gods, but do not have the feats needed to earn such a title. They are powerful and undeniably strong, perhaps even unbeatable to an enemy that does not possess paracausality. That does not make them a god. Oryx is powerful and is heralded like a god of the Hive, but does not shape the natural world outside of his own ascendant throne world. Everything else must be taken manually, personally, not by the design or architecture of an all-powerful deity, but by the labors of a creature beyond natural means. In short, there are powerful beings in Destiny that appear as gods to regular creatures, as Superman would appear as a god to you or me, but they are not omnipotent, omnipresent, or nearly as oppressive as the Lords of Chaos. Also, there is the deal of corruption from the demons. Now, I don't believe Guardians would be susceptible to chaotic corruption for the simple fact that their true form is long gone. There is no soul to corrupt, nor presence in the warp, for they are literal manifestations of the light. of energy. One cannot corrupt a Guardian in the same way Nurgle would never be able to turn a Cornite demon to his side. In a way, Guardians are demons of the light, but if they made it to the many homes of the Chaos Gods, what would happen? From the top, I don't think Guardians would ever truly win, but for different reasons. At the throne of blood, wet with the souls of those killed in battle, Khorne is the hardest of the gods to kill, and the most powerful between them. A being that grows in strength as fighting rages on. In a setting like Warhammer, Khorne is a glutton, and in this fan-fictional reality where the Vanguard were somehow able to defeat all other Xenos races across the Milky Way before coming to try and take the Chaos Gods, Khorne would be stronger than ever. The manifestation of war. On the way to his kingdom, the Guardians would be making the fight harder. Fighting him, even still, would be greater. The only way to defeat Khorne is to not fight. How do you beat something in a fight that you cannot fight? Mayhaps if all life outside of the Vanguard was extinguished and all that was left were the Chaos Gods and Guardians, he may be weak enough to be taken out, but that is a very strong if. For the Guardians can reach bounds outside the natural order of cause and effect, but so can Khorne. All of the Chaos Gods are powered by ideas, not tangibility, meaning that here, above all, the paracausality of the Guardians is brought to a halt as they are stepped down from their throne in a place that does not align with reality. Essentially, it is a very wide maybe whether or not Guardians could even attempt to take down Khorne, as to do so would be akin to taking on the Witness, who, as we've seen, also does not play by the natural order of things. Having to do with everything plague-related, a barren galaxy with Guardians who never get sick and never really die, Nurgle would be the weakest of the Chaos Gods and easiest to kill. He is the personification of entropy, like the darkness in the Veil. As wielders of the light, the Guardians are his exact opposite. If Guardians were ever able to kill any of the Chaos Gods, Nurgle would likely be the easiest, on account that they are the only remaining species of life in the galaxy. Where excess is to be found, they take a hand in it. In pleasure, in greed, in the betterment of oneself, Slaanesh is there to capitalize on your gains. Based on the activity of any regular Guardian, this may just be the hardest fight for the Vanguard, for as obsessed with loot that they are, Slaanesh would likely take great swaths of advantage from this. They do have the knock of being the youngest and therefore the weakest of the Chaos Gods, but a society of gamers hellbent on getting the strongest and most powerful weapons, armor, and emotes around would be direct fuel for the god of excess. Like Nurgle, this fight would be infinitely easier than one against the other two gods, but still likely an incredibly horrible one, as many Guardians would likely be torn away from the fight in pursuit of loot offered to them in order to keep an endless horde of min-maxers busy in perpetuity.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! 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 Aw, dang it!
Basically, a fight with Slaanesh would be like the Dares of Eternity on repeat forever. And for last, the Lord of Change. Ironically, the greatest challenge for the Guardians, who are all about to change to meet the next enemy. Where a labyrinth designed by the Vex or Necrons can be abused by the paracausal nature of the Guardians, a labyrinth that is not designed, that is merely a manifestation of the Guardians' own goals changing forevermore, is likely to stop them, removing any chance of ever finding the chaotic god of change to begin with, let alone attempting to defeat him. Guardians, Titans especially, would struggle with the puzzles drawn by Tzeentch and may be outwitted by a being that can alter the rules of the game at any point. A true god that can play around, seeing the futures of paracausality and using it to help him decimate the Guardians in a way that no other Chaos God could fight against. With the others, it's mostly a matter of withstanding what they throw at you and not feeding into them. Nurgle is fed by death and decay. Two things the Guardians counter. Slaanesh is fed by excess and avarice, which can trip up a Guardian, but may eventually be overpowered. Khorne is fed by bloodlust and war, which can also be eventually powered through. Tzeentch has no foil. He is his own greatest foil. If anything, the Lord of Change would make the Guardians think they won by letting them win before coming back with an even greater scheme. Not to mention, no plan great enough to defeat such an entity could be made without empowering him at the same time. And with all the other Chaos Gods, this is all under the presupposition that you could even truly defeat them to begin with. The thing about Chaos is that it's not real in the traditional sense. While there are theories and beings like Khorne that may truly be out there with a pulse, they are all the same, merely a manifestation of emotion personified. One cannot kill the Chaos Gods any more than you can kill the light or the darkness. It is simply not possible to defeat that which does not manifest. Paracausality be damned. Guardians can defy the laws of physics and space and time. They cannot kill time itself. They cannot shoot the concept of gravity any more than they can the concept of love or war or ambition. In short, there is no winning against the Chaos Gods, even if the Guardians were able to defeat some manifested avatar of them. In the end of it all, as we spoke about it before, the main issue boils down to the concept of these universes. Destiny has an end goal, a state we've yet to see. The main issue for the Imperium is defeating enemies for good, that even reality-defying Guardians struggle to take on. For Guardians, the main issue is that even beyond every other enemy, you cannot kill your emotions, no matter how hard you try. So this has been it, my breakdown of pairing the universes of Warhammer and Destiny together. I think a lot of the Guardians issues come down to the overwhelming bleakness of a grimdark universe, where the Imperium has to deal with enemies specifically crafted to only be defeated by Lightbearers, which is the hardest part of figuring out how these universes would interact. It's like pairing Doomguy in any universe where the Slayer's singular ability is to meet and then surpass the power of whatever he's fighting, even if it's the literal creator of the universe.
I find the idea of a bug that thinks offensive.
Anthroponic aliens with a knack for devouring, conquering, and expanding throughout the universe. Dark, deep magics that are more ancient than the stars. A never-ending swarm of biomass that refuses to give in or moving on the path to genetic perfection. Today we delve back into comparing the sci-fi worlds of Warhammer, Destiny, and now, StarCraft. There's a lot of crossover in ideas between these series. Of course, they all take inspirations from the same places. StarCraft came from Warcraft, which itself was originally pitched as a Warhammer fantasy game. So it also takes the same ideas where Warhammer 40k is fantasy but in space. StarCraft in many ways becomes Warcraft but in space. The same can be said for Destiny, taking tons of fantasy tropes from magical wizards to the Force to knights and goblins and more, but making it sci-fi instead. And as such, these very insectoid species, the Tyranid fleet of Warhammer, the Hive Pantheon in Destiny, and the Zerg Swarm in StarCraft all feature similar ideas. With their similarities, I want to bring you along today as we learn about these various factions and discover which one is the most powerful among them. Where that inspiration comes from, mostly Starship Troopers and Alien, there's also a small yet noteworthy contender who just quite didn't make the cut. The Tyranids from Helldivers. We've done a deep dive on them in this episode of An Idiot's Guide, but there was really not that much lore behind the Helldivers as the other three we have today. So I just want to acknowledge that I thought about it, but we will not be bringing the Tyranids into the discussion today. This is our third Destiny, Warhammer, and now StarCraft crossover video. Check these out afterwards if you haven't already to get an idea of the battles between Space Marines and the Guardians. But without further delay, let's get started. Before comprehensible thought, in a time before time, a species of beings known as the Krill that were brought to a hellish world of poisoned skies, toxic oceans, and carnivorous clouds, beaten down by the current guard of the light, warring within themselves and always striving for more, until 3 brave of the Krill descended into the deep of their home, finding ancient worms that needed to feast on conquest. In exchange for immortality, these 3 were each given a worm's larva that would reside within them, feeding the worm through themselves as an avatar. Once the worms became too ravenous, one stood upon the others, killed them for their power, and would slay the worm deity Akka. With its power, this Krill of the hive had ascended. He was now Oryx, the Taken King. Bringing his sisters back, Xivu Arath in an act of war and Savathun in an act of cunning, the way of the sword was perfected in Oryx's strategy. The hive would bring in other Krill by want or by force, each of them adopting the worm's larva and spreading out death in efforts to feed their masters. The hive had become the most complex, multi-level marketing scheme in the galaxy. The hive are insectoid species of alien that live with a symbiotic larva within them, larvae of the worm gods that feed their powers. They often grow in stages. First the thralls, who become acolytes, who then evolve into the knights or wizards. Ogres being a thrall tainted by a wizard's magic. Different sects of the hive also differ based on their origin. Savathun's hive are more pale, whereas the Taken King's son Crota features a brood who are stockier and bulkier. A religious series of rituals and profane rite lead the hive. They are guided by sword logic, an idea that the strongest survive and one must prove themselves in order to ascend. Once a member of the hive has ascended, they may carve out a throne world of their own, an underlying plane of existence within the ascendant plane, making it a secondary world within a secondary plane where the hive are stronger, more powerful, and the only place where a member of the ascendant hive can truly be killed. For if the ascendant is killed in real space, they will simply return to their throne world. The only way to truly kill a hive god is to kill them in their own throne world. A task insurmountably difficult as the laws of reality are changed within their own realm. Using biomechanical weapons and traversal, the hive rely on summons and ritual to channel darkness from the witness. Using this magic to their advantage as they cut off the light and kill the guardians who may oppose them. Cutting through the fabric of reality, the hive use sword logic in flight, literally cutting through the real world as we know it to travel intergalactically, powering arcane locks and other technologies using the souls of the mortal realm. They are a spiritual species that forces the natural orders of reality to work in their favor. Constantly evolving and changing, the hive are adamant in changing to face their enemies, a fate that led the Witch Queen, Savathun, to even accept the light and share it among her lucent hive, creating light-bearing acolytes, knights, and wizards that could fight with the same strength as guardians and could kill the vanguard, as well as their mastery of the darkness-based incantations they often use. Arguably the strongest of the hive, Oryx, the Taken King, alone he would be an incredibly unstoppable challenger. A being with a sword so sharp he could split quarks in 2. His planet-sized warship made of the corpse of a dead god, only killable in his throne world, which even if one had the ascendant nature of the hive or the light of a guardian to enter said throne world to begin with, they would still have to fight Oryx on his own terms, a feat that is near impossible without paracausality. The Taken King and his dependents can also take from the real world, bringing a creature to the ascendant plane and breaking them, returning the being to the material plane covered in a membrane of darkness that feeds upon the light, making creatures and soldiers of all sect from any species into tools for the Taken Hive to use in their conquest towards the finality of sword logic, the final shape, and the death of everything. At another edge of the galaxy emerges multiple broods of swarms, designed and made to combine with another species to form the perfect army of hybrids, before breaking apart, gaining their independence, and choosing to become the perfect species, not just to further the army of one specific being, but for their own meanings. An overmind first separated from the extreme swarm, later finding its own footing and connection to the rest of the swarm, something different, separate, but yet the same, connected in ways unseen, driving this unrelenting force to push forward and finish their directive. The Zerg swarm, seeking to assimilate and conquer other beings to take fruitful elements from other species across the galaxy, making themselves more perfect in the process, seeking out amongst the stars to spread their seed across the galaxy. Often slave-based creatures that demand a strong leader to be at the chain of command, the Zerg falling apart and cannibalizing themselves is left to pester on their own. But when properly led on, the Zerg can repopulate a colony in a short amount of time from a single body, with the ability to cut warp holes in space and travel faster than light, breathe in space and survive for a nearly infinite amount of time. With no technology of their own, the Zerg are entirely dependent on their power structure and the rapid evolution of their base genetic code. One single Zerg is not a sentient thinking creature, but still can possess some limits of cunning natural instinct, but their strength normally comes from the pure overwhelming force of the creatures gathered together. Born with claws that can shred metal, spines that fire like bullets, and spells of immense energy that ward over their foes and even allow some Zerg to take the shape of their enemies, infiltrating, consuming, and killing their opponents. While very resistant to many things, the Zerg are also especially weakened by various forms of radiation, a dangerous threat when left to fester, but easily dismissed once their pyramid of hierarchy collapses, and the struggles from a power vacuum drive the Zerg into a bloody civil war.
We broke their hive fleet. Soon, their foulness will be but a memory. That is what the preachers say.
From reaches beyond this galaxy comes a force unrelenting. Branches of a greater whole known as the Great Devourer. Links between ancient aliens in our own galaxy that prelude a long-forgotten first invasion, now being drawn to the new fleets that scour and rip worlds to shreds. There is many, as there have always been, but there is also only one, the Hive Mind, a single powerful force that directs every single unit, every arm, every leg, like gears in a machine, or more accurately, cells in the body, driven by a larger force to work in the total and extreme benefit of the Hive. The Tyranids of Warhammer are a ferocious force who launch from planet to planet. The first day they drop, they might go unseen. For weeks, they devour and consume. By the time a world realizes that there's an invasion, the claws of the fleet have already dug in. A distress call is sent out, but in as little as 100 days, by the time reinforcements arrive, the planet has already been overtaken by the swarm. The top of a world scraped clean of every ounce of biomatter within, a new fleet born of this feast to shoot off onto the next world. A force so ravenous that some of the Imperium would rather let the Tyranids take a world, wait for them to gather all in one place before blowing up the planet entirely, taking as many of the Tyranids with the celestial body in one malevolent move, rather than to face the beasts head on. The Tyranids are not many species working together in the regular sense. They possess a type of advanced biotechnology that allows them to form ships, weapons, and everything they need to conquer the galaxy and consume all life with nothing but the bodies of living matter. Every gun is a separate creature melded and forced onto its host, a symbiotic, sometimes parasitic relationship that makes the Tyranids not working together, but literally becoming extensions of one another. A level of connection seems similarly with Astartes and their power armor. It is impossible to tell where one Tyranid ends and where another begins. This grotesque relationship shaping their force of rapidly adaptive creatures that can evolve to persist in every environment against any enemy. So much so that it's not impossible to be able to document each and every variation of Tyranid, as they are practically unlimited in their possibility of form. Even what has been seen of the Tyranids, hive fleets that have protruded into the galaxy at a steady pace, each larger than the last, hive fleets Behemoth, Kraken, and most recently, Leviathan. A force so large it had spurred the Imperium to draw on every single resource they have to combat it, while making temporary alliances with the Tau, Eldar, Necrons, Oryx, and even demons in the pursuit from removing this unshakable foe from their territory. As of what we've already seen, even Leviathan is thought to be a scouting party for an even larger fleet that threatens the entirety of life in the Milky Way. The autonomy of the Tyranid hive mind is manifested in their Swarm Lord, a technically unkillable creature that stands as the current pinnacle of Tyranid evolution. Designed by the hive mind to be a strategist and overcome every enemy the swarm encounters. Whenever the Swarm Lord is defeated, an exact copy is created by the hive mind with all the memories, thoughts, and evolutions from the previous. But this time it would be better, smarter, and stronger. An evolving champion that will never lose twice, coming back into the fray with the knowledge of how it lost and how to avoid that a second time. It's unknown just how one might defeat the Tyranids, as the full scale and power of the hive mind has not even been revealed to the galaxy in the few hundred years since they've begun invasions across the Milky Way. But one can assume there may be a center, a true source at the top of that hive mind that leads all the way along. Or the hive mind may just be the overall connection between every last Tyranid, meaning that to defeat the leader, you literally have to defeat every last Tyranid. Every strategy the Imperium has for killing Tyranids focuses on depriving them of food when possible, or holding out in great feats of ruthless attrition. Some will even point Oryx at the Tyranids to go keep both sides at bay, but that's putting an endless horde of soldiers who love to fight and get stronger as they do, against a force that endlessly consumes and also becomes stronger as it does. So while the fighting will keep them at bay, there is eventually going to be a winner, and that winner will be unrecognizably strong. Across the stars, we have 3 factions of bugs. Now, if they came to the center and battled one another in a massive 3-way war, what would that look like? Firstly, I think the Zerg would be the first to go. They may be able to absorb some sects of the Worm Hive or Terminid Swarm, but compared to the other two, the Zerg are the least organized and the least uniform. Once the Overmind is defeated, as hard as that may be, that's it. Then they will devolve and cannibalize their own ranks while still fending off 2 oppressive forces, something that has happened multiple times by now. What of the Worm Hive and the Tyranid Hive then? This is where destiny, paracausality, and Warhammer over-the-top nonsense come to face each other once again. Even the strongest of the Tyranids, the Swarm Lord, could not battle Oryx at his full might, but I don't think they could kill one another either. With the workings of the Throne Worlds for the Hive Gods effectively making them immortal to the Tyranids, as only Ascendant Hive and paracausal entities like the Guardians can even enter a Throne World, making the deities like Oryx and Savathun untouchable from the Tyranid swarm. An important note about the Tyranids is that they have no presence in the Warp. In Warhammer 40k, the Warp works a lot like the Ascendant Plane from Destiny, where souls are represented in an immaterial place. But Tyranids, as pieces of a larger whole, are known as a shadow in the Warp. As such, they would not have the realm-altering abilities that would allow them into a Throne World to attempt the killing of a Hive God unless the door was opened for them.
What's strange to me is that she's vulnerable here. Why would she just let us walk in?
Where the Tyranids excel is in feet-on-the-ground infantry battles, featuring their parasitic biology and redundant organs, second brains, living ammo, and the ability to sustain ranks through the bodies of their own forces. The Tyranids can outnumber and overwhelm the thralls and acolytes of the Hive, possibly only running into an issue with the greater wizards, witches, or knights, or light-bearers who, like chaos demons, offer no source of food. The Guardians and Lucent Hive alike don't leave behind a tangible corpse, as they are manifested in the light, meaning they could battle the Hive for years at a time, starving the forces they battle against in the process. If we're left to the Tyranids and Hive Gods, I see one of 2 scenarios playing out. If the Tyranids have a host like the Zerg, if the Hive Mind is led by a single powerful entity that has a pulse that can be killed, Oryx and his Taken, Savathun and her Lucent, the Hive Gods who cannot be killed, could come out on top by battling to the source of the Tyranids and striking at the heart, attempting to kill the true Swarm Lord, clawing out a desperate victory for the sword logic. By now you may be wondering if it's possible for Oryx to make Tyranids into Taken. Why not make the Swarm Lord and any other powerful Tyranids work for him in the fight against them? Well, in the same vein that makes the Tyranids immune to demon possession, they aren't individuals, but all smaller parts of the hive mind whole. To take a creature is to torture their soul in the Ascendant Plane, something that cannot be done to the Tyranid hive mind. But if the hive mind is a collective, and to kill it is to kill every last scrap of Tyranid in existence, I think the best case scenario for the worshippers of darkness is an eternal stalemate, to hope that the few unkillable of the Hive live on eternally, the Taken not want for the conquest of all, but to combine the darkness with the light in the pursuit of the Witness's final shape at the death of the universe. So if anything, the Tyranids consuming the galaxy and being left with nothing to feast upon, slowly burning away and falling apart with nowhere else to go, would be a net positive for the Taken King. This was the same strategy employed by the Necrons, who should have no reason to clash with the Tyranids, but the Necrons seek to one day becoming living, biological creatures once more, making the Tyranid threat of extinction across the galaxy much more present for them. Oryx and the Hive do not have this issue. They can wait for the final shape, and the greatest threat against this strategy would be a civil war within the Hive's own ranks, as sword logic dictates the strongest survive, leaving Oryx and his sisters to kill one another in their cowardice, hiding away in their own throne worlds. What do you think comes out on top? The magic and occult deities of Destiny's Hive? The Witch Queen's Lucent fighting back forevermore? The Tyranids' endless swarm that relent not and push on in pursuit to consume? Or do you think the Zerg somehow have a say in the race and I counted them out too early? Let me know in the comments below. The ruinous powers who play the great game, introducing chaos to the universe at large, and entropy incarnate, the ultimate strength of willpower, enforcing itself upon another. Welcome back, ladies and animals, as we delve once more into the universes of Destiny and Warhammer 40k to pit Oryx, the Taken King, without his sisters Xivu Arath and Savathun, against the 4 Chaos deities, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and of course, Slaanesh. If you noticed in the last big 40k versus Destiny video, the Taken were entirely missing from both the Hive and the Witness's forces. Well, that was mostly a byproduct of my rampant ADHD missing out during the scripting process, but now I can claim it was a part of the plan all along, as we pit the Taken King and his brood against the personified ideas of battle, change, and avarice. How strong are each of these nebulous factions? How would they interact? And how similar are they in reality? Or rather, in the absence of reality. So without further ado, let's get into it.
The rest await extermination. No. Gather them. I will take them all.
A millennium before humanity had left its caves on Earth, Oryx had come to be the most powerful being of all Hive creation, taking the powers gifted to the species by the worm deities of their homeworld and crafting it into his own ruinous design. By killing Akka, he instilled a new sense of complete knowledge within himself and the ability to take, which was instilled in him by the Witness. So, how are the Taken, these amorphous, blobbed versions of enemies we've seen before in Destiny, made? For the Witness, who seems to have developed this ability, it consists of ripping a being into an alternate dimension, known as the Ascendant Plane, which runs parallel to reality, much like how the Warp does the same. In this realm, the collective minds of the Witness converge and convince the being to come over to their side. Once returned to reality, the afflicted creature is covered in a blackish membrane of blight and imbued with the paracausal powers of darkness. A sense of divine loyalty is pledged to the Witness, and they collect new powers to be used in their creator's name. Now, the Witness has taken hundreds of worlds on a whim, but the Witness is an outstanding exception. Oryx, the Taken King, can do nearly the same, but on a much smaller scale. A massive question to our upcoming battle is whether or not creatures of the Hive, especially the Taken, are susceptible to chaotic corruption, or if demons can be taken in the inverse. We know that Guardians cannot be taken, as the light is the inverse of the darkness. Light is life, free will. The Taken are the opposite, broken down to their bare mechanics with no sense of freedom whatsoever. Even when once attempting to take a ghost, the Traveler instead had the ghost destroyed rather than even risk it. So, for as long as the Traveler is alive, the light cannot be corrupted. Even the Witness tried from within the Traveler and could not pull it off. But for those not immune to it, the act of taking is a sharpening like a kitchen knife. Impurities, jagged edges are cleaned away and sharpened to align with the will of the controller. In this instance, Oryx. What remains is the soul, the creature, but removed from its mind, from its free will. In a sense, I believe Chaos could corrupt the forces of the Taken in theory. See, the most prevalent way Chaos corrupts a soul is through their own failure of willpower. If you're strong enough in will, you cannot fall to Chaos. So while the Taken could be corrupted in theory, they would not fall due to an undying loyalty to their creed that is whipped into them. Now, could Chaos be capable of being taken? Well, it depends. Most demons in 40k are just physical manifestations of the warp and their associated Chaos God. They won't have a soul to be brought into the Ascendant Plane. That'd be like trying to take the light. It just wouldn't work. And if you could even try, they lack free will in the same way that the Taken do, so they'd be unable to voluntarily submit to the Taken. But for some, like most Chaos Space Marines or cultists who are merely augmented by Chaos but not quite full manifestations, they still have souls in real space, and could in theory fall to Oryx's taking. But of course, this is still a case-by-case basis and certainly not the rule, as others like the Demon Primarchs are manifestations and as such, immune. So the strongest of Demon and Chaos kind would be immune from the Taken, whereas lesser powered cultists and Marines could fall into Oryx's ranks. And on the flip side, the Taken are capable of slipping in theory, but aside from a few choice Taken who rank with some sense of self-authority, would be immune from Chaos's temptations, although regular Hive would likely be much more susceptible to Chaos's reaches, including the Thralls, Acolytes, and obviously Ogres.
Let the seas boil. Let the stars fall. Though it takes the last drop of my blood.
Now, there's only one way for each of these functions to kill one another. As we spoke about in the previous episodes about the Hive and Chaos, the only way to defeat each of them is with great effort. To kill Oryx, you'd have to become Ascendant, invade his throne world and kill him. To defeat the Chaos Gods, well, you'd have to end the universe, which for Oryx and his sword logic, on the path to the final shape, might just be possible. The sword logic in concept is social Darwinism. The strongest survive. In application, it is existence proved through action. I do, therefore I am. Oryx had slain his sisters, proving himself to be stronger and more cunning. He killed the Worm God, proving he could speak to the darkness directly, as they did, and so forth. This is what allows them to interact and carve out space in the Ascendant realm. It's what allows our Guardian to slay Crota and through sword logic prove that we are capable of ascendance so that we may enter a throne world to face Oryx ourselves. So for Chaos to even try to eliminate Oryx, they would have to prove themselves ascendant by killing the upper classes of Hive kind in the same way we had killed Crota to prove ourselves. Now the big question is whether or not greater demons or the Demon Primarchs could come to this, or if only mortal beings can become ascendant. We're not entirely sure how souls work or how they interact with the greater metaphysical functions of reality and destiny, outside of a few good guesses. So whether or not demons could even become ascendant through sword logic, which states that life sustains through hardship, is up to the air. For me, I would say they cannot, because sword logic applies to life. I think the undeath forces of chaos would be ineligible from this process, locking them out from using sword logic on their own accord, meaning that unless Chaos whips up a sufficiently powerful mortal coil that can ascend and challenge Oryx in his throne world while also not submitting to the Taken while trying to do so. In order for Chaos to win, they'd need a champion akin to Horus, the heretical Primarch, in order to even attempt running Oryx's fade. But for the Hive, for Oryx and his fleet, their end goal is the death of Chaos. The death of complexity, where simple order reigns supreme through sheer force of will, where the universe is sharpened taken and perfected into the final shape it will ever take. The perfect sword. The biggest issue for Guardians taking on Chaos is that they thrive off of the same complex and chaotic energies as the Ruinous Gods through bomb logic. A system that is infinitely complex but also infinitely more powerful when perfectly aligned in just the right way. Kind of ironic in a way that the big bad of Warhammer seems to align with the Guardians of Destiny, and the Guardians' greatest enemy, or at least one of, is perfectly attuned to defeat Chaos and their complete control of reality at the end of everything.
Demon Hunters! Chaos cannot stand against us! For we are the Hammer!
In short, I think that in a universe hosted by the Taken King against the forces of Chaos, the Hive would come out on top, purely based on the integral workings of their creed and magical systems. The Chaos Gods cannot be killed, but they can be stomped out from a raging wildfire into the smoldering ashes of creation. Without a champion like Horus, Chaos cannot defeat such a powerful foe that is also mortal, for Oryx works on the same principles as the Emperor, who he himself could not be defeated by Chaos without Horus's intervention, and even still, exists in perpetuity. Oryx, in the Warhammer universe, would simply become a being on par with the Emperor pre-heresy, but without the ability to be corrupted in the same way that most Primarchs or mortal beings in Warhammer can be, making him perfect to be the king above all else that grinds the great game to a halt. Welcome once more, all you ladies and animals, to a great breakdown of pitting Destiny and Warhammer against one another. Now, this is a slight repeat, as Tyranids and the Hive have been thrown at each other in the past, but where the two bug-like factions are very similar in terms of etymology, they are not in structure. Versus the Vex, who, like the Tyranids, function as a hive mind of sorts. Each and every atom of the Tyranids works in correspondence with one another, just like the Vex do, operating as cogs of an even greater machine. We've briefly covered the Vex in the full-out Imperium and Vanguard versus each verse video, and the Tyranids in the Bug War. But there are a few things deeper in the context of each of these factions that may elevate them to be perfect enemies. So a few things may be repeated if you've watched all the past Destiny v Warhammer videos, but without waiting around too long, let's get right into the Tyranids. First off, I want to apologize for misinterpreting one of the Swarm's greatest abilities, the Shadow in the Warp, which I took as the Tyranids blocking out the warp entirely by sheer mass of the hive mind's presence. In practice, it's much more of an overwhelming effect rather than a total blackout. But aside from that, let's retrace our basics for the Tyranids, massive, ever-evolving biomechanical fleets of monsters that feast on biomass. Now, the term biomass can get confusing here because it doesn't limit the Tyranid swarm to exclusively carbon-based life forms. It means that anything they can use to generate the energy needed to produce a larger swarm, they will consume. And that does mean everything. Tons and mountains of dirt, fresh with nutrients in the soil, every little insect and worm within, each and every drop of an ocean drinking the planets they come across into dry husks, sucking down the atmosphere and starving the worlds they cross of air, soaking in the sun and presuming the solar energy for their own needs, chomping down on metals and inorganic material which is not even out of the realm for humans. Like Joey from the basement yard, yes, it is surprising to learn that there are literal flakes of iron in your cereal, because we can take that metal compound and turn it into a positive for our bodies. The Tyranids do this too, but to the nth degree. By the time they leave a world, all that is left is a barren husk, as all other biomass is scooped up by the fleet before they move on to the next. They will cover a world in almost a type of acid, literally liquefying the contents to be vacuumed up by the fleet. Energy is built up and expended into an invading force, with more being expended later on if the resistance is enough to warrant it, evolving upwards from small gaunts to the larger screamer killers, phages, and biotitans until the ultimate form of Tyranid perfection, the Tyranid Prime, a creature specifically designed by the hive mind to never lose twice. Whereas other Tyranid forms slowly evolve in small ways to counter a world and its people, such as developing extra layers of fat to live in the snow, fins to swim through swamps, or a tough mucus layer to help defend against the Tau's railgun weaponry during the first invasions of Hive Fleet Gorgon. But the apex, Tyranid Prime, is much more tactical in its design, not only keeping the memories of the previous form, but building itself in a way that perfectly counters what it had fought before. Killed by a salamander, will develop a form that focuses on melting civilians with acid and a thicker hide to make you flame resistant. Killed by an Imperial Knight, create a form that is larger, tankier, and strong enough to rip through the legs of the mechanical beast before devouring it wholesale on the ground. The Tyranid's greatest ability is that of reproduction and evolution, but it can often be a double-edged sword. Even in the example of Hive Fleet Gorgon and the Tau, the trade-off of anti-railgun gaunts meant that the fleet was producing swaths of smaller Tyranids and not enough of the tougher forms that pose a greater threat, leading to their downfall as a legion of Marines came to help the Tau push back the monstrous invaders and destroy the fleet. There's always a trade-off. But the Tyranids can also evolve in interesting ways not bound by pure biology. Yes, claws and teeth and acid and guns that shoot parasites are fantastic, but we've also seen recently how Tyranids have begun to develop and create forms that can use the psychic powers of librarians and other psychers against them, throwing out powerful waves that shut them down. Too much exposure against the Tyranids at any scale, and they will develop a way to defeat you, as it's only a matter of time. A great way to think about the Tyranids is like radiation sickness. Currently, there is no cure. If you're exposed to the demon core, your body just starts to break down. You can't reverse this, you can't fix this, you just have to treat the symptoms. The organ failure, the blood loss, and the damage to your DNA. All you can do is treat the symptoms, but you cannot cure it. Tyranids are much the same. You can't so simply just kill the Tyranids, but you have to fight the symptoms, counter their evolutions, force them against the Oryx, blow apart entire worlds that they gather on. Fight the symptoms for as long as you can. For all that we know, they are literally unending, as we have no idea how many of them are actually out there.
I think this is the end of them, a path with no escape, and yet, here they are. There they were, and there they will be. And there they will have been. For them, there is no paradox, there is only the pattern. And the pattern needs the Vex to see it to completion. And so the Vex must be, for the mind of the Vex, is that faith?
The Vex are not just robots, or even milk splooge in robotic frames. The Vex are the end. The definitive final shape that the universe becomes at the end of everything. They want nothing but for everything to be Vex. Now, as we talked about in the last mashup video, the Vex cannot be defeated. They are as inevitable as the churn of time. In fact, they are so inevitable that it's speculated the Gardener, essentially the Light, had introduced paracausal forces into the universe by way of the Traveler and Guardians to throw off the Vex, which is exactly what has happened so far. See, the Vex do not exist in time, or rather they do not perceive time as time. There is not past, present, or future. There is Vex, and there is not Vex. The past is merely a state of the universe when there was not Vex that led to a state of the future where there is Vex. Confusing, I know. We've seen before that the Vex can, quote, delete people from the timeline, which is partially true and not true. It is in a way, but why is it? Well, it's because of the Vault of Glass and Atheon, which is going to be the greatest difference between how this fight goes. See, the Vex can't just pull time trickery nonsense out from nowhere. That's why the Infinite Forest and the Vault were constructed. It's a controlled environment in which the Vex could simulate everything. But causality is a hell of a thing. They could try to eliminate the Traveler from time and space, but doing so may well damn them in the process. Due to the illogical nature of the Light, it had become impossible for the Vex to find which moment in time they could delete the Traveler without removing themselves from time at the same time. I hate time travel paradoxes so much. But inside the Vault, they can simulate everything and anything, allowing them to delete individual Guardians who were trapped within because the laws within the Vault are written by the Vex, rather than following the rules of actual reality beyond it. The whole point of the Guardians going into the Vault of Glass and stopping Atheon was to trip up their plans to expand the vault so that it could affect the greater universe outside of it. So if this battle between bugs and bots is taking place after the vault was shut down, then it helps the Tyranid side of things, but that's if the Tyranids can be simulated. I think we have come to the point of a mathematical stalemate. See, the Vex can simulate everything and anything except for paracausality because it simply does not follow logical rules. Solar titans do not gather millions of hydrogen atoms and squish them into a bomb to make a solar grenade. They just summon the solar plasma from nothing and throw it at their feet. They say, "Fuck you, big hammer." It makes no logical sense, and thus the binary operations to the Vex cannot calculate it, outside of the Vault, which runs on their own laws of reality. And the Tyranids, while not paracausal, are definitely hard to predict. You can assume the basics that they will consume and replicate, but that's no different than assuming the basics of a Guardian is to protect humanity. Tyranids may look the same, but genetically are all unique. Whether that be for minor differences, like maybe 2 different gods have different colored blood, or 5 toes instead of 4, or 36 teeth instead of 30. Each and every Tyranid is a unique amalgamation of biodata, no matter how similar they appear on the surface. In a similar way that Vex can infinitely calculate all of causality, the Tyranids can infinitely change their form on what is basically a whim. Not to mention the Tyranids can evolve in ways that just don't make sense, like them evolving psychopathic powers out of nowhere. One of 2 main scenarios I can see happening is the Vex and Tyranid forces instantly make a 180 on one another. The Vex have infinite time and can just wait out the Tyranids until the heat death of the universe. In the same way that Tyranids avoid Necrons or Chaos, they may also just agree to leave the Vex alone. If a few of their cast get burnt alive when trying to slurp some milk, they'll move on to other planets, not wasting any biomass for planets that they might barely break even on, leaving each faction to go separate ways as they wouldn't really battle one another here. But on the off chance that they continue to run each other again and again, what would happen if each hive mind understood the goal of one another? Now, we have 2 factions that operate incredibly similarly to one another. The Vex, who seek to make all others Vex, and the Tyranids, who seek to consume and expand to be all-encompassing in the universe. Even besides the ideas of calculating existence and possibilities, what happens when these 2 hive minds meet on the battlefield? If a Tyranid swarm fleet landed on Venus, if the 2 met in combat, I believe something strange would happen right away. See, there is one Guardian out there that did something not unlike what we'd expect the Tyranids to do. Cobber, the Titan who programmed the Aegis Shield into a vault of glass infused with his actual light, while trapped within the vault, drank the Radiolarian milk within, something that corrupted his form and essentially turned him into a Guardian Vex hybrid before eventually going full Vex, somewhere in the garden. We know this from lore entries where Cobber refers to himself first as K for Cobber, KV for Cobber Vex, and finally just V for Vex. So pitting these 2 everlasting forces against one another would not lead to one defeating or eliminating the opposing side. At least, I don't think so. I believe that the Great Devourer and the Transcendent Mind would combine in some strange way. As flesh and metal and maths and teeth collide in an unholy evolution of perfection. The ultimate calculator, the grandest evolutionary force in all of existence. The Tyrant Vex. As Tyranids attempt to consume or devour Vex architecture, the plasmatic milk that makes up in some part their physical form, especially in Vex homeworlds or their special creations like the Vault of Glass, the Tyranid hive mind would become integrated with that of the Vexes. As we know, Tyranids will just evolve to integrate things that should otherwise kill them, like poisonous gas or even man-made super diseases. Signals of the Vex clashing with and slowly subsuming the hive fleets into a unified organism that can calculate the perfect answer to any problem with the perfect organism to do the job. The universe would be wholly Vex, but also entirely Tyranid. Frames of flesh and metal that can change instantly on a whim and take on enemies in a battlefield. A mind that can compute every option instantly and artificially restructure their bodies to take on any fight. Running into Cabal, instant evolution to give them the tools that perfectly counter the heavy armor and explosive arsenal from the frogs. Finding the Tau have you pinned at range? Instantly form a bunch of specialized hunters who can teleport behind enemy lines with gigantic claws that rip battlesuits in half. A perfect symbiosis between the absolute mathematical logic of the Vex and the brute force evolution and unending force that is the Tyranids. A hybrid system that cannot be outthought, can never be defeated, and is destined to be the everlasting final shape at the end of everything. A combined force dedicated to consuming and integrating itself with the universe until there is nothing left of reality outside of these tyrant Vexes in existence. Until reality ends, and then they do it all again. But that is just my opinion. If you think otherwise, as if the Vex or Tyranids might take one out for one reason or another, or something else entirely, let me know down below in the comments. And if you've liked this, please consider subscribing if you want even more like this. There's a whole playlist covering all the different universe v universe breakdowns I've done, including Helldivers and Gears of War, and of course our past Destiny and Warhammer comparisons. And if you want even more, join the Patreon or become a member on YouTube for just $1 a month. Even more content and exclusive videos all just waiting for you over there. As well as, of course, getting videos early and without pesky ads. Check it out. As always, our Colorful World merch is still up. This is all for charity, so each and every shirt, jacket, or sticker is going to be donated to my local food bank. If you'd like to help me support a good cause, get your wonderfully soft shirt down below. But with all of that said, thank you very much for watching. Remember to stay cool, have fun, and be awesome. Buster out.